You heard earlier from Dan Barker about the Clergy Project, and the first graduate of the Clergy Project is a former Pentecostal minister named Jerry DeWitt. And he gave a wonderful talk at the Reason Rally in Washington. It's available on a website. I'll leave this up for a bit if you want to check it out. Listen to it, it's great fun. And about halfway through this, and it's all in evangelical, rolling musical cadences. He's a brilliant preacher, really. And he describes the 5 stages of his theology. And first, he believed that God loves everybody. But he couldn't reconcile that with the fact that God sent a lot of people to hell. So he changed his mind and decided that God saves everybody. But that didn't seem to square well with what he thought he knew. So then he decided that God is in everybody. And that seemed more defensible, and he clung with that for a while. And then he got the idea that God is everyone's internal dialogue. And then, as he memorably says, at this point, he was just one good book away from the 5th stage, God is a delusion. And so now he's using his skills as a preacher to carry the word that God is a delusion. So this is the website for the Clergy Project. Dan Barker played a big role in getting it organized. Linda and I helped, and Richard Dawkins Foundation helped by providing the technical help to set up this website. Now that it's going, yes, thank you, Richard. Thanks, Dan. Now that it's going, as Dan said, you have to be a preacher or a former preacher to be in this. So Richard and I are not preachers or former preachers, nor is Linda. So we're completely outside. We have no access to their discussions, their debates. They are self-governing. They do their own thing now. We've launched them and wish them all the best. And as Dan says, they have now over 200 members. And every now and then, somebody in the group sends us an email about how they're doing. They're doing very well. Without any advertising, they have picked up these new members, and they're being very careful about they're not sending out brochures or big blanket things to all the clergy in the world. They want the clergy to hear about them and come to them. In fact, one of their main problems now is that because it's all confidential, of course, but in order to get in, you have to prove to the members that you're legit. And they don't want journalists or troublemakers trying to get into the inner sanctum of the Clergy Project. So the vetting process is quite careful and laborious, and that's a bottleneck now. At this point, there isn't funding to provide job retraining, which is what we would love to have for them. But there is support that they provide for each other, moral support and help and advice, and it seems to be working out wonderfully. And one of their members, when we raised the possibility of trying to come up with funding for retraining, for instance, sort of a safe place where people could get retrained to go out in the world, and this one former preacher said, if you promised free training, you'd have 10,000 members tomorrow. So it's a really interesting problem. And one of the interesting things about it is that when we published our first study, Linda and I, when we published about clergy who don't believe, we expected a lot of church leaders, religious leaders, to condemn us for making a mountain out of a molehill or making the whole thing up. There was very little of that on the web. They all know it's true. There was hardly anybody who questioned the fact that this is a phenomenon. What nobody knows is how big it is. The clergy that we interviewed, that Linda interviewed, they really all think that they're the tip of the iceberg, but they don't dare ask their fellow clergy, They're like gays in the 50s without gaydar. They don't dare raise the issue with other clergy they know whom they suspect are just as much non-believers as they are. And well, they should be careful, because one of the things that came out a few weeks ago is that one member of the Clergy Project took a brave move and told his best friend, not somebody in the Clergy Project, but his best friend, a parishioner in his church, that he joined the Clergy Project, and he didn't believe. His best friend. Next day, he'd lost his job. So it's serious.